Hello, I'm Pastor Matthew Verhoeg, and I'd like to explain Luke chapter 4, verses 14 to 30 in 3 minutes. The scripture begins, "And Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and a report about him went throughout all the surrounding country, and he taught in their synagogues, being glorified by all." How Jesus had just come from being tempted by the devil. And he immediately begins teaching in the synagogues, which were the churches of that time. And everyone loved him. It continues, "And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of the sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor.' And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, 'Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing.'" Jesus, quoting Isaiah, teaches that he is the fulfillment of the Old Testament hope. Now, he's not going to liberate people from slavery, but liberate every humble heart from their slavery to sin and Satan by dying on the cross. Luke continues, "And all spoke well of him, and at the gracious words that were coming from his mouth. And they said, 'Is this not Joseph's son?' And he said to them, 'Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, "Physician, heal yourself. What we have heard you did at Capernaum, do here in your hometown as well." And he said, "Truly I say to you, no prophet is acceptable in his hometown." Although the synagogue is happy with Jesus, they quickly remember that this is the son of a humble carpenter. Jesus responds and says they really just want him to do miracles. They want signs and not the precious words of life that he is bringing to them. And so Jesus goes on to teach them an important lesson. "But in truth, I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months, and a great famine came over all the land. And Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath, in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, but none of them were cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian." Jesus uses 2 Old Testament examples of a time when Israel was unfaithful and suffering under God's judgment. God didn't show mercy to any Israelite, but only to 2 Gentiles. In this, Jesus shows us that God does not want just to save Israel from political bondage, but save the whole world from their sins. So the crowd responds. "And when they heard these things, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath. And they rose up and drove him out of town and brought him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so they could throw him down the cliff. But passing through their midst, he went away." The crowd was so angry with Jesus. They wanted him dead and dead now, but God saved him from this. Now, this text shows us a microcosm of Jesus' mission. He would go to his own people, but his own people would not accept him. So then he would bring his salvation to the whole